सर्वधर्म स्वरूपिणे अवतार वरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः. So we were discussing how humanity has made progress. Swami Shardananji, in his Great Master, he discusses about the progress made by humanity, preparing the background of Sri Ramakrishna's background to Swami Sri Ramakrishna's advent. So he says in the beginning, which we discussed yesterday, that all the five elements which we see in Prakriti, about which we discussed in great detail. So humankind managed to have a mastery over several centuries over this entire inanimate world of matter. Then after that, he succeeded to a certain extent to tame the forces of nature and have some kind of control over the inanimate matter. And then they also had a zeal to study internal nature of living beings. That is the second point that we discussed. First, that he tried to satisfy his curiosity and is still continuing to satisfy his curiosity about the external world, and to which Swami Shardanji says he succeeded to a very large extent. Of course, there is a lot of discoveries yet to be made. We have hardly scratched the surface of the immense possibilities which humankind is capable of. But anyway, a lot of progress has been made, especially when dealing with the five elements of earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the 4 or 5 states of matter as they are described in Vedanta, which can be translated into solid, liquid, fire, which is plasma state, then air, that is gaseous state, and then ether, which is just space. In quantum mechanics, it is known as in the space which you see between the different subatomic particles, which are huge by any standards. They are also of planetary proportions. I mean, in the whole cosmos, you see the distance, millions of light years away, you can see galaxies. So also, if you go into the microcosm, as Swami Vivekananda had a vision in Almora, that the microcosm and the macrocosm have been built upon the same plan, built on the same plan. So the wonderful intrastellar distances that we see in space outside, the same distance you can find within. If you go in deeper and deeper into subatomic world of particles, you will find the same distances compared to an electron or compared to some quantum particle, and the distances between them, the way they are revolving around each other, revolving around the nucleus, even the nucleus itself, it is not so dense as we really imagine. It appears to be very dense when it comes to the atomic, when you come to the gross level, we see a substance. But if we go deeper into the substance, we'll find the same distances. Of course, in the microcosm, as we find in the macrocosm, the distances between stars and planets and the galaxies. So Swami Shardanji says, whatever they did, a lot of considerable knowledge was generated by humankind when they explored far off planets and also succeeded in their quest to estimate. They don't know everything, but they know a lot now as to how many galaxies with the modern telescopes and so many wonderful things, inventions that have been made by man. His reach in his quest to search for newer and newer things has humanity has progressed a lot. So they also had the zeal, according to Swami Shardanji, to go deep into the human personality. The yesterday's class, which dealt with the science of human possibilities in Vedanta, there are many avenues which we have yet to discover, but a lot of amazing discoveries have been made in the mystery of life, how humankind reacts, I mean, chemically, what are the biochemical reactions that constitute the human body, how the pranas, the different life forces act upon the body. So a minute study has been made, and not only in as far as human beings are concerned, or also animals are concerned, but even in the microorganisms and the plant life, where the fundamental actions, forces like the capillary action, which takes water from the root up to say several hundred meters, some long, very big coniferous trees. How does the water rise? So these are all the forces. The prana is not only active in the human beings or in the animals. The prana is life force is seen in these huge trees, which is nothing short of a miracle. So this capillary action and all the wonderful uh, life forces that you see in the plants, they also have been studied in great detail. And then finally, Shardanji says that they delve deep to find the nature of the human mind, which was a great mystery, and even now it is a great mystery. What is our mind? What is our consciousness? So, how do species evolve? Why are people born with a better mind and some people are born with a dull mind? Is mind material? So, Vedanta came to this conclusion long ago that mind is nothing but fine matter. Just as we have discovered the fine matter in inanimate things, even among the living beings, there are subtle forces, subtle reactions, subtle electrochemical reactions, which empower our brain to do certain significant phenomena which a human being has been endowed with. So, a lot of tasks, a lot of intellectual skills, and a variety of discoveries have been made. How the neurotransmitters in the brain, they conduct the signal. So, a lot of in-depth study of the biological or the gross aspects of man has been made. The nature of the body and also the nature of the mind. Whatever research both the West and the East have done, the Orientals seem to have excelled in the study of mind and the subtler aspects of human personality. So, but in any case, the conclusion which science comes to, or maybe is trying to come to, that every event in the microcosm, in the subatomic world, whether living or non-living, is regulated by an inviolable law, which is, according to the Vedas, known as Kratu, the cosmic order. And the macrocosm, the planetary motions, the gravity, and all the forces that we see, the forces may be different, but the principles that guide the microcosm, the world within and the world without, they are built on a same plan. That is why Swamiji says, I made a great discovery. That was one of his uh, curiosities, that are what we see outside and the internal world, what parallels do they have? Is there an external world independent of the internal world, or are they dependent? What is the plan on which both are built? So, mankind came to the conclusion, and when he studied a human mind in depth, first he tried to study the condition of the human mind. Why certain people have depression, mental disorders? Because they have inherited almost the same body. You cannot say that everything is genetic. There are certain things, when the genes which we have inherited, they may give you certain characteristics, certain uh, diseases like autism and mental disorders. They may be biologically inherited, but there are many things that a human being or a newborn child is born with. He has some unique possibilities or unique disabilities which are not common with his parents or even with his siblings. So, although humans have no definite proof of some kind of eternal existence of an individual life, everybody was trying to find out. They have their own ideas of immortality, the longevity of human life. It's not just 100 years or whatever biological span we live in. There is always a doubt that human life continues beyond the grave, or even after the physical death, something continues, whether you call it the soul. So the study of history, Swami Shardanji says, has confirmed that there is some kind of continuity, if not at the individual level, at the collective level. The continuity of nations, the continuity of culture. So there is a sense of eternality, which Swamiji pointed out. If you study history, a wonderful series of books which Arnold Toynbee wrote, a study of history, so many volumes, more than 10 volumes, I think he has written. A study of history by Arnold Toynbee, which says that this continuity, this eternality, the quest for something which is eternal, something which is more, eternal than it's not temporary. So the search for the permanent amidst the temporary phenomena of nature is a very old quest. Whether it is in search for the unified theory in the cosmos around us, a unified theory which will explain all the forces, a unified theory of matter or unified theory of forces, energy which is interacting with matter. So some kind of unification or some kind of generalization human being always seeks. In Vedanta, generalization of the spirit led to the discovery of the Atman is equal to Brahman, that equation, that the individual soul at a deeper level is one with the universal soul. So this individual fulfillment, the individual quest within the collective national life, there is a collective national life where the trends or the tendencies of a large number of people belonging to that culture flow in a particular direction. Each country has its own passions, has its own quest, whether it is external or internal. Everybody is waging a war against ignorance, some kind of ignorance, whether it is science, physical sciences, and they have all unified their efforts to share the knowledge. The European nations shared knowledge with each other. It went to America and then went to the other countries, colonized countries as well, directly or indirectly. This knowledge percolated. So the knowledge of politics and administration, which the Romans excelled in, according to Swamiji, percolated all over the world. That knowledge became the common property of all. So also we will find the knowledge of the sciences, the knowledge of the arts, the knowledge of biology and all the biological sciences and the physical sciences have become common property of the entire humankind. And similarly, the discoveries which India made in the world of the mind, the spirit, in the fields of yoga, they have also become common property of the entire humankind. And all are apparently, though there is a tendency to monopolize this kind of learning, not share it with others, but somehow, just as science becomes the common property of all, no matter how much secretive you are, there is a tendency for unifying all the efforts. Nothing can be done by one country alone. Though we might have excelled in certain fields, some other country might have excelled in some other field, but finally they have to share notes. That is what Swami Vivekananda said, that India's progress stopped when she stopped comparing notes with other people. She remained so much obsessed with the internal world, the world of the mind, the world of the spirit, the internal quest became so important that they failed to share notes with other countries. They became exclusive, not all inclusive. That is why we did not find so much of material progress in India. It took so many years after independence when we started comparing notes, when we started taking the best from other cultures. Then we got success and now are succeeding. So history has its own way of sharing knowledge. So everybody in the world, Swami Shardanji says, we have countless desires in our quest to understand the mystery of nature. Not that it will end at any point of time. You will not find an end to this quest. The more research you do, the more deeper you go, whether you go deep. In fact, Swamiji believed if you go deep enough in the search of some kind of unification in matter or the energy, you will reach the same point as you did in your internal quest. So there's no such thing which can strictly classify as external or internal. Any subject, if you go deep enough, it leads to some kind of unification. And the quest is for unification. People are always struggling. There's a beautiful word, there are two words in Sanskrit, pravrutti and nivrutti. What do they mean? What is pravrutti? Pravrutti means we try to gather everything. Vritti means actually whirlpools. You see, the vritti word which is used in Patanjali's yoga, it actually means whirlpools. Vritti has come from the word vartula or circle. So as soon as you drop an object or drop a stone in a pond, there are vrittis, there are concentric circles are formed which travel, which appear to travel, and they travel also on the surface of the water. So drop one stone and there is a whirlpool created. So any disturbance on the mental plane, it creates a whirlpool of thoughts. So that is how the vritti word has come. So pravrutti and nivrutti, these are the two words which explain the entire secret of human quest. When you say you are undergoing pravrutti, that means you are trying to gather all the forces of nature, all the materials, everything around yourself. The ego becomes very, very prominent. Ego is the center around which we heap. We try to heap around us the material comforts, wealth. We don't know where our quest will end, but we have a tendency that is known as pravrutti. So those who belong to pravrutti are considered to be after materialism, because they want to heap around themselves. As it were, they are at the center, their ego is at the center, and they want everything for themselves. This grabbing attitude. I want money. I want more and more money. I want more and more power. I want more and more whatever is I can lay my hands upon. I want to heap it around myself. Now, if you ask the question why he is doing it, he can't explain, because that is the nature of pravrutti. So moving towards the center is pravrutti. Moving away from the center is nivrutti. Ni means going away from. Vritti means the vritti which takes you, which disperses. And you have a tendency to renounce everything. So that is nivrutti. So in both fields, the Western civilization and the Eastern civilization, there have been exceptional people who have excelled in pravrutti. There are great emperors who have grabbed as much land as possible. But Swamiji says in his wonderful talk on Maya that no matter how much you grab, pravrutti has a limit. When a man is sufficiently gathered around himself, things which he can no longer sustain, nature plays tricks upon him. And not only tricks, nature, as it were, Swamiji uses some harsh words. He says, nature grabs that person by his throat, and with clutched fists, he tries to grab everything. He has limited scope, but still he feels he can grab the entire world. And that is what Alexander did. That is, they famously say, when he was dying, he just grabbed a fistful of mud or earth, and he said, see, all the result of all my conquest is only this. Even this will not go. Maybe this will go with me to the grave, but this is all the land, everything. Finally, I'll be buried in a small corner of this earth, and with closed fists, perhaps I'll take these two. I'll grab some soil which I think will be my own, but even that will be buried. So when pravrutti becomes too much, that is when you say evil becomes yada yada hi dharmasya. In Gita we say, when evil becomes, what do you mean by evil? This tendency of mankind to grab what is not his is known as pravrutti. So a counterbalance has to be there. If not in one nation, another nation practices nivrutti to counterbalance, because nature always seeks balance. When the water rises in one arm of the test tube or one arm of a U-shaped glass vessel, you will find it always tries to maintain a balance. It won't stay long. You may disturb it. You may take the water to a higher level, but water, when it when you allow it to settle, it will maintain its level. So that is what we find when pravrutti becomes too much in a country or in a place, in a geographical location. There are these world wars, this tremendous greed. Nature does not allow. Nature, as some philosopher or as Mahatma Gandhi has said, nature has many things for man's need, has sufficient for man's need. We have enough to satisfy our needs, but we don't have enough to satisfy the greed of everybody. Everybody can't be a millionaire, or everybody can't aspire to have indefinite, because the resources are limited. You can't just imagine the impossible. So pravrutti is that tendency of every human being when he seeks greatness in the external world to gather everything around himself. Pravrutti, all the vrittis, all the quests that he makes is to make himself powerful, make himself richer, make himself do everything to create a lot of, I mean, to collect everything around himself. That is negated by this idea of nivrutti. That is what we say is vairagya or renunciation. So, without waiting for nature to grab our throats and make us release all that we have grabbed, some wise people, as Nachiketa is told by Yama. Yama tells him, Kaschid Dhira, some wise man decides to follow the path of Nivrutti. What happens when he follows the path of Nivrutti? He dives deep into the internal world, the subtle world, which is far more rewarding. The experience of research, both the external world also gives you a lot of joy when you make new discoveries. But it has a tendency, if you don't follow that quest with the spirit of truth, there's nothing wrong in pursuing science for the sake of knowledge. If you seek knowledge, pure knowledge, but unfortunately, success in the material world, whatever research you do, has a tendency to increase pravrutti, to gather things, to make yourself richer, compared not only at the individual level. Not only do I want to be rich, I want my country to be rich. I want my country to have as many rich people as possible. And then people fight for this GDP, the more GDP. But that GDP, that pravrutti is at the expense of some other countries who are becoming poorer. You can't expect everybody to become rich. So in nature, as in the individual, in society also, we will see certain countries have this nature of pravrutti, and certain countries have this nature of nivrutti. So India chose because they found that the internal quest so fascinating. They wanted to go deep and they wanted to conquer the internal world. And they succeeded, of course, just as the West has succeeded in conquering external nature. We have succeeded because we focused more on the internal nature. But according to Swamiji, we need both. So, Swami Shardanand in a second paragraph, in the second paragraph, he says, although the expansion of materialism originated primarily in the West, its influence is visible not only in India but all the colonized or Eastern countries. The power of science, according to him, brings East and the West together. It's a fact. Everybody is trying to imitate the West and get the benefits of science and technology to improve the standard of living. So they have not only brought the East and West close together. Science has played a very important part of uniting the East and the West in certain respects. But the Eastern outlook of life is slowly undergoing a change. In the process to assimilate the Western outlook of life, in the process of absorbing the ideas of pravrutti. India is slowly losing its hold. That is what Shardanji believes. Its hold on nivrutti. So the idea of trying to live with our needs, not with greed, that is slowly becoming lesser and lesser in India. And that is what uh, we say adharma becomes prominent. So when materialism becomes prominent, when pravrutti becomes prominent and nivrutti becomes less, then the Lord has to come. And he comes with a message. That is why Holy Mother said the main message of Sri Ramakrishna is renunciation. So he knew that to counterbalance the effect of the West, even before Lord Macaulay decided to westernize the entire colonized countries, including India, with a system of mainly with India. India was one of the biggest acquisitions the West had. So he wanted to convert, if he believed that if he and all others believed that if Western ideas and Western influences are imposed upon the younger children, the education system, then Indian values and Indian Eastern ideas of nivrutti. Now, even in India, you will find people mocking at this idea of nivrutti, this idea of vairagya, as if their ancestors, their uh, great ancestors have made tremendous mistakes. People laugh when you talk of Vedas, when you talk of renunciation. So much they have been uh, brainwashed. I mean, the Western system of education succeeded to a very large extent to brainwash the Indians to say that pravrutti is the only way of life. We have to compete, we have to be fiercely competitive, we should not care for anybody. Somehow try to gather things around yourselves and ourselves and then make ourselves prosperous. So that pravrutti is a natural outcome of a materialistic point of view. So if we see the present condition of Iran, China, Japan, and India, if you see, uh, this Swami Shardanji speaking of 100 years ago when he wrote the Great Master. But now things have been magnified. Now he would have added many more things to it. But even then he found that Persia, that is Iran, China, Persians were the spiritual nivrutti, the movement of nivrutti in Japan, all the Buddhism and all the world moving ideas, prophets who gave world moving ideas of renunciation. Buddha preached renunciation, Christ preached renunciation. Though he was born in the Orient, but his message spread far, and for some time it stemmed the tide of materialism in Europe. But somehow the materialism managed to crush the forces of nivrutti and they became more. So this counterbalance is always going on. Whenever there is excess of pravrutti, nature has its own mechanism to control that growth, to control that greed, to control the selfishness, the self-centered approach towards materialism. And then some kind of toned down materialism, Swamiji believed, is necessary for the East also, because they had so much of nivrutti that perhaps to maintain a balance, a little bit of pravrutti will come from the West. But it should not be so much that it will sweep away all the ideas of nivrutti from that country. But somehow, whatever be the future outcome, Swami Shardanji says, there is no doubt that the West has influenced the East and is continuing to do so. And for some people who write books like The Clash of Civilizations and all, Samuel Huntington wrote that famous book, he has made his own study, but unfortunately he's left out India or the great efforts or the great contribution India made in the field of nivrutti. He's trying to analyze everything, the clash of civilization, from a Western point of view or from a materialistic point of view. So Samuel Huntington says when civilizations clash with each other, it's just for power, glory, and not just there is no distinction made between the internal conquest and the outer conquest. The ideas of pravrutti and nivrutti which India developed the Indian sages developed, they give legitimacy to both. They said certain dharma, artha, kama, these three are lead a man towards pravritti, but they control him. After a certain dharma enables that artha and kama. Artha means prosperity, kama means desire, the desire to enjoy this world. Kama means desire, and artha means wealth. So desire and wealth have to be controlled by dharma. So dharma, artha, kama, the four purusharthas, the four quests of human mind has been beautifully classified. You can't just go after dharma of after artha and kama as the West did. If you break the laws of dharma, if it is regulated by dharma, then it brings you slowly, after a little adventure in the pravrutti, it will bring you towards nivrutti. That is the logic behind dharma. Dharma always, but when adharma rises, the pravrutti increases and the Lord has to come. So the idea that the whole world will be westernized, the whole world will follow the quest for pravrutti to become more and more selfish in its acquisition of the material in the material world, that is not going to happen. So what will be the consequence? This is a wonderful discussion. You see, Swami Shardananji's scientific mind is analyzing everything even before he starts discussing the birth. Such a biography you will not find anywhere in the world. This great master, we have biographies of great saints, including that of Buddha. But this analytical approach, preparing the circumstances, discussing about the circumstances under which the incarnation takes birth. Why does it take birth? What is the necessity? So everything has been as if everything has been explained, as if a lawyer is trying to explain the intricacies of the case. So with a firm grounding in logic, a firm grounding in science, because of his training in medicine. He was in medical school. So Swami Shardananji had the advantage of a firm foundation in scientific knowledge, whatever was developed at that time, the advances in science and technology which he was exposed to. He had firm groundings in the ideas of logic or Indian Nyaya. Nyaya is nothing but Indians have excelled. That is another topic, we will not discuss it, in the matters of logic. So you can't say that logic is just, or rationality is just as many of our Indians very ignorantly think, that we got all the rational approach to life only from the West. No, it is wrong. It's not that science alone, it's rationality is the monopoly of science alone and the Western civilization alone. No matter they used it, the search for truth, they followed a rational approach, and that is why the organized religion, the dogmatic religion, did not have its hold on Europe, though it had a lot of influence when Christianity and Islam, they went to different parts of the world. They spread very fast, but somehow the organized religion never took its roots. There were so many reform movements, the Protestant movements and other things, where they said, no, you have to be logical, because that was the scientific approach of Greek thinkers who questioned everything. And that idea or that quest was never allowed to die in India. Don't think India did not use a rational approach to the material sciences. It's only they didn't focus much. They used the rational approach, a scientific approach in the field of religion. That is why we have one of the grandest religions of the world, the Vedanta. So to understand, Swami Shardananji says, to understand the long-term effects of Western culture, Western materialism, we should not criticize or just say everything East is best, everything that comes from the West is bad. Swami Shardananji is a very, very rational person. Before dismissing, one cannot afford to be exclusive. that saying that we are having the best civilization or best culture in the world. If you have it, you have to prove it. If it is more sustainable, you have to prove it by historical facts, you have to prove by logic and a very deep analysis. So that is what Swami Shardanji is doing. So we understand, even before discussing the life of Sri Ramakrishna, he says, he tries to find out what are the peculiar circumstances, not only in Calcutta or West Bengal, but the entire India, the Indian subcontinent, which had to bear the full impact of the Western influence. Of course, England and other countries. Other countries also tried to come and occupy and force their ideology on the Indians. But what was the result of that? So we have to analyze that. The future effect of that progress can be determined by observing the Western life. That is what Shardanji says. We do not know how the Western civilization or the Western ideas, the materialistic ideas of the West will impact us. You mind you, this book was written, or Swami Shardanji started to write this book much before the first two world wars took place. Though Swamiji predicted the world war, he said Europe is on the top of his volcano. It will burst any time if it does not infuse these thought currents of spirituality. So East has to save the West, and the West has to improve the condition of the East, the poverty and other things, by exchange, by a very fruitful exchange. So what is the source? Swami Shardanji asks. By observing the Western life, which he did till 1910 or even earlier, even before the World War, some signs of a collapse or a big war or maybe a merciless destruction of each other was there in the air. Swamiji mentioned it in the East and the West. He says, I smell of war. When he was passing through Germany, he passed through every country of Europe and explained the characteristics. Why Europe, if it does not correct its ways, will lead in a mutual destruction of each other. All the countries, if they do not cooperate with each other, don't take the ideas from other parts of the world which have given a better solution to the life's problems. If we don't mix the best of the East and best of the West, what will be the condition? And he says, to determine the long-term effects of Western influence, we must concentrate. In one paragraph, he analyzes the effect material development or scientific development has on the West and analyze the life of the Western people. That is why when we discuss Swamiji's life through the Western eyes, through a Western disciple who was steeped in Western thought and then embraced the Orient and understood the benefit of studying both. So Sister Nivedita's biography is one of the best biographies because it combines the Western outlook to Eastern philosophy. We can't just have one. We can't be exclusive. There are fanatics who believe that East is the best. Maybe in certain respects she is the best in the internal world, but you have to accept that the West has also something to contribute. But we cannot take everything from the West. There are negative aspects of the Western civilization which we have to reject, but at the same time there are negative aspects of the Indian civilization or the Eastern civilization. So too much of nivrutti also will not be good, too much of pravrutti. Nature always wants a balance between pravrutti and nivrutti. So now Swami Shardanji goes into a discussion, conducts a discussion and says, what is the source of West's materialistic progress? To find out first what are the long-term effects of Western influence on other nations, first let us find out, he says, how the Western way of life has impacted the Western people themselves. What is the nature of their materialistic progress and whether how its influence has affected the early ideas of the West and brought progress or deterioration. Whether the sum total of all the progress or all the wonderful discoveries that the West, especially Europe, and then it spread to the entire West, what has happened? Has it really benefited humanity? Without analyzing this, you can't just make a uh, conclusion. You can just come to a conclusion. Swamiji said that would be like saying grapes are sour. Because we cannot reach the grapes, the jackal thought that the grapes are sour, let me soar. So we don't want to try for those. No, you have to analyze, find out if the grapes are they really sour, and find out what is there anything sweet in the Western civilization, how its influence has of the Western ideas have brought either progress, or what are the ideas which gave rise to some kind of progress, and what are the ideas which brought about a downfall. So if the effect of materialism, that is in relation to the past of European civilization or the Western civilization, what has resulted in happiness and what has resulted in misery? There are certain aspects which have brought happiness. Let us study that as in a true rational spirit and try to find out what causes the misery. So remove the causes of misery and retain the causes of happiness, and then same thing you have to do with the East. If of the effect of this materialism on the lives of individuals and nations in the West can be determined, and we find out what happened to each nation, what happened to each individual, then it will not be difficult to say that the same thing will happen if we undertake the same quest. Not that we'll not learn from the West. We have learned and we will continue to learn from some other country which has excelled in certain things. But we have to find out in what way it has benefited them. Whatever has benefited them will benefit us. Whatever has caused problems, we have to avoid. So it will not be difficult to say that the same principle is applied, can be applied to Eastern civilization. The Westerners also have to be very liberal. They have to find out that is everything associated with the colonized nations bad? Is renunciation bad? If they were bad, India would not have survived. There would not have been Buddha, there would not have been Krishna, there would not have been Ramakrishna, there would not have been even Christ, because Christ was born on the soil of the Orient. Though his influence of Christianity and Islam, they were all born here. The major religions of the world, including Buddhism, they were all, for whatever reason, because there were more people following the path of Nivruti. These people were born here. It's just a coincidence that, but there were great people in the West, just as there were great scientists who explored the external world in India and the other countries. There were enough great people in the West, saints. Maybe they were influenced by Christianity or Islam and other religions, their own religions. But there were people amidst the fight that was going on for pravrutti, the attitude of gathering everything around yourself. There were people who said, no, this is going to be harmful. Just as Christ said, he shouted from rooftops, you can say, in the Sermon on the Mount, he said, you can't have God and mammon together. If people had listened to Christ, that is what Swami Vivekananda said. If you had really listened to Christ and believed, at least some people, or a majority of the people had believed that you can't have God, you can't have spirit, you can't have nivrutti and pravrutti at the same time. If you had listened to your Christ, Swamiji says, go back to Christ. When he spoke that, people were shocked in the West. That was the impact of Swami Vivekananda. That he said, you go back to Christ. See what he said. See what message of nivrutti he gave. Just as the Eastern spiritual leaders did. Just as Buddha said. Everybody is emphasized the power of the spirit over matter. They emphasized nivrutti. Just as Western civilizations emphasized pravrutti, materialism. The scientists were swearing by science. And we just can't accept because it was said by Newton or because it was said by some great scientist. Why not consider these spiritual scientists. They were also scientists. Jesus was also a scientist. Buddha was also a scientist. Ramakrishna was a supreme scientist because he approached religion using the Western methodology of science to experiment, to verify, and then ask people to believe. He did not say, you believe me because I am a prophet or I am a avatara, you just believe. He never said. He did not even ask his chief disciple, who represented the Western ideas, to accept him. He said, you test me just as you would test any chemical in the laboratory and find out if spirituality is true, if these visions which I have, they are true, the spiritual quest is true. If everything is true, then you accept me. So he was the first, you can say, Sri Ramakrishna. That is why Swami Shardan is preparing a wonderful background to show Sri Ramakrishna did not come for a small community. Though people may like to tell that Sri Ramakrishna was born here, so limit him to that particular region, say Bengal or say India. You can't limit Sri Ramakrishna to any country. He was far, far greater than what people would consider. Everybody feels proud that Christ was born in a certain area, so he is our prophet just because he was born there. No, these universal people are not born. They may be born in a geographical location, but they transcend all boundaries because they talk of the spirit. They talk of universal ideas, just as science. Science might have been born in a remote corner of Europe or Greece or some other country, but it did not remain remain confined exclusively to the West. It spread as fast as the discoveries were made, and now because of communication technology, it's spreading faster. That we will see that all ideas will become more and more universal. You can't hide them any longer. The greatness of Christ, the greatness of Buddha, the greatness of Sri Ramakrishna and all the prophets, the greatness in the field of Nivrutti will always find its way to express itself. Otherwise, the world will collapse. You can't have, that is the universal truth which Vedanta discovered. You can't have pravruti, no matter how much successful you can try to convince people. You cannot live with mammon, or you cannot live with materialism. Some people, some section of the society will criticize the people who run after the spirit, just as it would be illogical to criticize people who run after the material wealth. So certain kind of little bit of toned down materialism, as Swamiji said, for nations. I'm not talking of individuals. So till that balance is maintained, Prakriti will always say, enough of pravruti, have some nivrutti. So to balance such people, to balance extreme materialists, we will have extreme vairagis, extreme people who say everything that is material is useless. As you can't have. Jesus Christ would not compromise, not even at the cost of his life. He preferred crucifixion than accept the idea that matter will survive. He says, I have seen this, spirit will survive. And God and mammon cannot go together. That is pure Christianity. That is pure Christ teachings. So if you follow Nivrutti, if you follow the path of Nivrutti, as Jesus said, or as Sri Ramakrishna said, God realization is the only goal of life, because they have scientifically proved it to be so. So, but before that, Swami Shardanji does not want to be dogmatic about it. Why Nivrutti is needed to balance Pravrutti? He is not saying that the Western civilization is wrong. He says, see the effect on their people. If there is something good, take it. If there is something bad, reject it. So he says, the combination, he says, first he says, let us see what effect it had. So first he says, let us study the origin and history of progress of the West. So he says historical records clearly show that in ancient times, why West progressed in the material field. You see such a wonderful insight he had. He said the cold climates, you see, if the body is, if the climate is very, very cold, then survival, just survival becomes important. So the body consciousness, that the desire to somehow survive this cold, to have some kind of heat, some kind of prana, otherwise the body will be extinct. So this body consciousness was necessary for survival. But beyond a certain point, if this body consciousness is extended and we don't focus on the other possibilities of the mind and the spirit, then what happens? He says it has a tendency for pravruti. It makes this body consciousness, this obsession with the body. The body should be beautiful, body should be strong, body should be rich, we should wear expensive clothes. It became an obsession. And when that happens, it makes a culture, it makes a person intensely selfish or full of pravruti. It leads them to pursue their self-interest of keeping their body in good shape. They go to ridiculous extents. Even if yoga is accepted, it has been reduced to just kind of some kind of uh, uh, technique to improve the quality of the body, to make the body more, stop aging, to look young. All these things, yoga has been used for centuries. Yoga was taken, but they took only the gross aspects. The Western civilization, in general, I'm talking, not all, but majority of them. He says the tendency is because of the cold climate. The body consciousness was strong, and that, so Swami Shardanji says, it made people equate self-interest with the interests of the body and the prana. So they developed their nationalism that we should be strong. We should have enough energy to heat our homes. What happens to other people, we don't care. Even if they die on the streets, we don't care. But we want to make our homes comfortable. We want prosperity. So this nationalism was built on the idea of selfishness, that me first, after me, my society, my relatives, my family, then my culture, then my nation. That is how nationalism is defined. So this nationalism, as opposed to Vedantic socialism, which believes in everybody living in harmony with each other, this nationalism proved to be intensely dangerous, because you can't have certain nations prosper when other nations, especially the neighboring nations, if they are poor, the poor will one day try to strike a balance, restore this balance. They said, you can't become rich at our expense. We will also need a share of that. So this nationalism led to the World War. That is what happened. Each nation was trying to grab wealth from other colonized nations. Each was trying to outwit the other through the power of science and technology, guns, ammunition, and all those things, to increase one's wealth, national wealth. And the combination of selfishness and the peculiar idea of nationalism. It's not bad to be a nationalist in the true sense, but it motivated people to become wealthy, amass great wealth by defeating other nations. Otherwise, why would Germany try to conquer everybody? It is just this greed, this pravruti. When they had satisfied their material needs, when they had enough to eat, they had satisfied their needs, then greed took, that selfishness took the form of greed. I have my needs satisfied. Why should I go after more and more things which I am not going to use, which I can't even take along with me to my grave? Leave alone, live with it eternally. We can't even take the things we have to our grave. So, when they had satisfied the material needs, the Western civilization, or the Western people, Swami Shardanji says, increasingly, gradually became introspective. They felt, is this mad race for money or wealth or material accumulation, is it good? some good people, some morally good people, wise people, they started questioning this. So you see, it's not that the Western people were all bad. There were some people who said, no, too much of greed will cause wars and will fight with each other. So they wanted to engage in some deeper learning and acquiring some moral virtues, how to control this greed. So they were slowly going towards nivritti. So when struggle for existence, when the cold no longer troubled a human being, when there was enough energy, enough material needs were satisfied. So the struggle for existence was not paramount. So they did not, they said, our needs are fulfilled. They thought, let us go after higher things. They perceived that the bigoted ideas of religion and religion, which was organized religion, which was trying to, which was decaying because of the authority and power the priesthood had over human beings, they started rebelling, these intelligent people. Not only did the priest say that the pursuit of material science would displease God and doom its practitioners to eternal hell, but they also firmly resolved not to allow. You see, that is another extreme. These religious they persecuted people, scientists. They in fact killed a lot of scientists. They said, no, you can't make any material progress. That is also wrong. You can't. And the reason they gave is that God will be displeased. You will go to hell. So they try to do it forcefully, not by convincing people. See, vairagya or nivrutti should be natural. You can't force. And when you force, because of to hold on to power, the organizations or the authority, the priests themselves became materialists. So the Western people forcefully rebelled against this priesthood and moved forward. They said, no, we are not going to listen to you. We will go after science and philosophy. This is liberating for us. Though they did not know that if its science and philosophy is misused, it can cause harm. But they still thought it is better than a dogmatic approach and the selfishness of the organized religion or priests, as well as the dogmatic scriptures, not the real scriptures, the real eternal values of scriptures. The dogmatic ideas and religious beliefs were causing a lot of problem, causing a lot of contraction, causing a lot of misery. So the Westerners set their lives upon a new path. They said the guiding principle of Western civilization, which is a great thing. Swami Shardanji admits that. He says, do not believe or accept anything without definite evidence from the five senses. The only mistake they made was evidence of the five senses. If somebody says God stays in heaven, don't question him. Don't believe in him. Ask him to prove the existence of hell. Ask them. They are putting so much fear, that torture in hell. Show us evidence. So that was the liberating force that Western civilization did by Swami, as Swamiji says, they were destroying the porcelain masses of dogma. They were like porcelain, they were just destroying with the hammers of reason. They were saying, no, we can't believe in your ideas of eternal hell or eternal heaven. You show us some evidence. So the guiding principle of the West at that time, according to Swami Shardananji, is that do not believe in anything without definite evidence from your five senses. The truth regarding, he says, regarding a particular object was henceforth to be based on direct sense perception and through reasoning and inference. You use reason, anumana. Reasoning is a logic, nyaya, inference is anumana. Anumana means you base your, take reasoning as your help, and then you infer certain truths and say, because this was true, because I see crows are black here, in other countries, everywhere the crows are black. So we infer that crows will be black everywhere. But there is a fallacy, as Sri Ramakrishna pointed out to M. He said, suppose you find a white crow. Will your theory, will your logic stand? It will just collapse. So there's something beyond logic. So, but anyway, they cleared a lot of superstition and dogmas, which the grip of the priests which they had on the people, making them suffer. So somehow this Western civilization, this idea that don't believe, that is what Swami Vivekananda also did. He was influenced by this Western principle. So he said, I can't believe you because you say you have seen God. Can you show him to me? Can you make me experience? That makes Sri Ramakrishna, the great master, a great scientist who convinced. He said, no, no, you have to question me and I will give you the right answers. Yeah. So now we will come to the conclusion. We'll start the next paragraph, the origin and history of progress in the West. And that is topic is still there. We will discuss it. We are slowly approaching the birth of Sri Ramakrishna, because Swami Shardanji has taken pains to explain why Sri Ramakrishna was born. He is not a person who was born in Kamarpukur. He was born, physical body was born, but he was not just born for Kamarpukur or Bengal or even India. That is why Swamiji says, I can't, there is no limit to the personality of Sri Ramakrishna. He is a truly international or a truly universal person. No country, no community, no caste or even religion can claim that Sri Ramakrishna is our own. The most universal, there's a beautiful Bengali song, Esheche Nutan Manush. He is a new type of human being. You cannot compare him with anybody. So it would be wrong to confine him. It would be, that is why Swami Vivekananda said, don't ever do it. Don't confine Sri Ramakrishna to a particular geographical location. Oh, he belongs to us just because he was born here. No, we can't even claim that for India, leave alone Bengal. We can't even say that because Sri Ramakrishna was born in India, he is ours. No, he was truly universal. As the scientists, we say the scientist may be born, but his science was for the entire humanity. You can't say because Newton was ours, we will, all the monopoly of his laws are ours. No, his laws are for everybody. The laws of gravity, even the Russians use, Indians use, everybody uses. So Newton may be a geographical figure as far as science is concerned, but he is universal because his ideas are universal. If the ideas are universal, the person becomes universal. That is the idea behind Sri Ramakrishna's universality. That is why Swami Shardananji, people would like, as many people pointed out, just like when we studied Holy Mother's life, they said, we want to understand the rustic simplicity. Why do we reduce Holy Mother and push her back to that Jairam Bati, where she lived struggling, and then we try to glorify that kind of life, a simplistic life. No doubt, she lived under those circumstances, but see her expansion, how broad her mind was. Even the most Western educated women also can derive inspiration. If they have to derive inspiration, they have to understand the universal implications of Holy Mother or universal implications of Sri Ramakrishna. Unless we do that, all our attempts to limit the message. So as Swamiji said, never do it. Everything should be sacrificed for that universal sentiment, that is universality. Sri Ramakrishna was universal, so Sri Ma Sharda Devi was universal, and all the direct disciples were universal. You cannot limit them with any kind of boundaries, mental or physical or geographical or even cultural. They belong to the entire humanity. This point has to be made very clear. And Shardananji does exactly that, because he came to the West, he came to England, he came to London and had a first-hand view of the West as Swami Vivekananda had. And that is why these people, when we read that these biographies, they give a totally universal perspective to these great lives. It would be sin to commit to restrict Sri Ramakrishna to a particular geographical location or even a country. That would be limiting his scope. We may like to say that he is one of us. He was born here, he is one of us. It's fine. He may be born in India or he may be born in the East, but he is not even a person who can be restricted and say he is Eastern. He is as Western as he is Eastern. When we say Western, there are many good things. So you find a combination of the best of the West and East in Sri Ramakrishna, in Srimad Sharda Devi and Swamiji and all his other disciples. That is how the universality of this movement gives life and gives nourishment to this movement. And that is why it is, Swamiji said, he wanted to set in motion a organization or a movement which will be universal in its scope, embracing everybody. That is the need of the hour. So we have exceeded the time. I'll just see if there are some questions. Yeah. World is made of up and down, mountain, sea, pravrutti and nivrutti exist in mind. Nature always seeks well. What happened after? No, equilibrium is, nothing happens. Equilibrium, one question is asked that if sometimes nivrutti prevails, sometimes pravrutti prevails, what happens after? Equilibrium is attained for some time, but it is disturbed. In some parts of the world, that equilibrium is disturbed, again it comes to equilibrium. So this eternal imbalance and balance is going on. That is how creation. It is a cyclic thing. So nobody can become evil for a very long time. So nobody can become good for a very long time. So all cultures are exchanging ideas, they are experimenting with ideas. If they cross the limit, they get destroyed, then again new things will come. So it is an eternal cycle. Now, we discussed God and Mammon cannot be had at the same time. God is Nivrutti, going towards inwards. Mammon is Pravrutti, going outwards. So this is the question. We discussed God and Mammon cannot be had at the same time. So the question is, God means Nivrutti, going inwards. Mammon means Pravrutti, going outwards. Without Pravrutti going outwards, we cannot survive, maintain a fit body for Upasana. Question is, how can we decide the extent to which we need pravrutti so that nivrutti is not compromised? How can we determine and strike a correct balance between the two to reach the ultimate goal? This is exactly what I was discussing. Pravrutti can, nivrutti, as I told you, nivrutti, these people say to balance the idea that pravrutti is everything, nivrutti is wrong. So also we cannot say that nivrutti is everything. If we consider the whole world, for individuals, it is possible. If somebody decides, for me, nivrutti is everything, like Christ said, if he does 100%, his followers, Sri Ramakrishna said, if I do 16%, you do one part. If I do 16 parts. So I'm not saying that a balance has to be maintained. We cannot, even if we want to, we cannot be 100% nivrutti. So that problem will not arise. There is no compromise. You do whatever you can, but we have to remember one thing, that you can't survive on pravrutti alone or nivrutti alone. A balance, how much of pravrutti and how much of nivrutti, that depends on the person. If he is somebody like Christ, if he is somebody like Sri Ramakrishna, he'll say, I will 100% go towards nivrutti. I want God and God alone. On the other extreme, there will be another materialist who said, I'll go after money and money alone. There was a strange person. I've heard, it may be untrue, but I heard there was a person in the Gulf countries. People who have met him have told me that he was collecting so much of money and amassing huge amount of wealth, bank balances, but very, very, frugal. He never even owned a big house. So everything was collected, money was collected. He became wealthy, one of the wealthiest persons. And it's a fact, it's a true story. And when he became old, he was asked, what will you do? You don't even have married, you're not married, you're single, you don't have children, you don't have relatives. He had cut off from everybody, he was just amassing wealth. And then he said, my desire, strange desire, you see how madness, he says, what else? When I die, I want all my wealth to be he literally said this. He may not have been serious and it could not be practically possible. But he said, I want all the money that is there in the bank, all the notes, whichever denomination, they will be placed on my funeral pyre and I shall be burnt on that. I mean, ridiculous. A person can, just as that's the extreme of pravruti, that you consider materialism to be everything. Even after death, I want to be burnt with the money I earn. So that is an extreme. Of course, he was not in the right frame of mind when he was old. But that is what the extreme pravruti does. So also extreme nivrutti leads to God consciousness. But because the spirit is always triumphs, it is always better, or not always better, the best thing to have total nivrutti. But before that, we have to maintain a balance. Because from the point of total materialist, when we tone down a materialism, little of nivrutti increases. Because according to the prophets, not only according to prophets, according to reality, the finest or the nivrutti which takes you to Satchidananda alone gives you eternal peace, eternal life, eternal consciousness. That has been scientifically proved by experiments. So that is the goal. But since we can't do it, we have to make a compromise. So was somewhere like ancient Greece, Harry Fuller is asking this question, that so we have to determine, as the answer to the question which was asked, how much of pravruti, how much of nivrutti, that is an individual choice. Now, somewhere like there's another question where 50-50 between pravruti and nivrutti, like they had Neoplatonism and yeah, definitely. In Greece also there were wise people, Aristotle, Plato, who preached philosophy, who preached the futility of just pravruti or material development. So that's why they died. Plato and Aristotle and all the disciples, all the great philosophers, they dive deep into this idea of nivrutti. So there was a balance. That's what I'm saying. All of Western civilization is not bad or good. All of Eastern civilization is also not bad or good. There are negative things in the East also. Too much of nivrutti for the community as a whole. For an individual, nivrutti may be okay, but not for the whole community, because there are people who need a little bit of materialism to survive physically, to have a good body, to do sadhana, and then to go towards nivrutti. To go towards nivrutti, you need the support of pravruti. How much, that depends on how much pravruti you are lacking and how much you really need. So there is a thing known as need, there is a thing known as greed. So greed will take you to get to have this idea of pravruti or materialism more than what you need, and need will ensure that there is a balance of nivrutti. Slowly pravruti gets less and less, gradually. It cannot be a fast process. So you are right, Harry is right when he is asking, not somewhere, throughout ancient Greece or ancient England also, you see all the countries, they might have been predominantly pravruti minded, but there were individuals. Otherwise, there would not have been balance. Society needs balance. There will be some people who believe in higher values, in God. So they maintain the balance and they don't allow the society to collapse. Okay. So I'll take your leave. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. So we'll meet tomorrow for the Friday Raj Yoga class.